I met Beck when I was 16. When Odelay came out, I was 16. I was obsessed with that record. And I was talking to my Uncle Ralph, who lived in San Francisco, and I told him I was going to go see Beck. And he's like, I can get you backstage passes. And I was like, what? Okay. So I went backstage and I met Beck. It was super, super cool. And of course, my friends thought like I was the coolest kid because I'm getting like backstage passes to Beck. And then I actually came back and played Akron the next year, and I saw him then too. But the real thing with Beck was like, we were here in New York opening for Sleater Kinney at the Roseland Ballroom. And like after the show, the ladies from Sleater Kinney were like, come with us. We're going to the SNL after party. Beck just played. We're friends with Beck. And I just happened to have a promo of that first Fat Possum record in my pocket. It hadn't come out yet. And I gave it to Beck. And I reminded him that I was like Ralph Carney's nephew. And a couple weeks later, we get hit up by our booking agent. He's like, Beck's offered you the summer tour.
Hey, it's Scott. On today's show, one half of one of the biggest alternative rock bands in the last 20 years. He is Patrick Carney of the Black Keys. The Black Keys have sold millions of records, been nominated for multiple Grammys. They have a new record coming out. I think you're going to really enjoy this interview. Join me in a moment. Patrick Carney of the Black Keys. Welcome into the show, Patrick Carney from the Black Keys. Great to see you.
Yeah, great to see you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we were just making a joke. Because I never have drummers on, Patrick, we could literally spend like an hour just talking about weird drummer stuff.
Yeah, we could make the worst podcast of all time.
Well, you guys did this really funny thing recently where you were talking. It was amazing, actually. The other day, it was on your Instagram. It's like you're talking about all the weird like, NFTs and supplements and kind of promoting the new record, right? And I think people probably went to search out that podcast and they realized it was all a joke.
Yeah, especially there was a couple, we did like a fake podcast promo. But yeah, there was a couple people who, it's just like, and we're talking about like, boosting your T levels.
Yeah. Then you're like 10% off and here's the code and it's some
like
weird.
Some chick from Ireland was like, sounds like you have a small dick. I was like,
even the promos that you're doing for the new record, they're pretty funny though. It's all about like this different generation and right? It's just kind of appealing to that generation in a sense.
It's just being lost in the mix.
Yeah.
Like, there's not much music press left. There's, but we kind of started realizing that, I guess 5-6 years ago.
Yeah.
That, there's like, it's hard to find new music. It's difficult. And then when you're putting out a new album, what do you do? So you maybe like just take matters into your own hands, have fun with it,
Totally.
And I do think, you don't want to go crazy with the podcast. I've seen some people just like do any podcast, just like get
the hi-hat podcast.
You're just like, Jesus Christ, dude. But it is like, these are like the new magazine article.
We met years ago. It's funny. We were just chatting about it through my mutual friend and your mutual friend, Todd, who was running Warner's at the time. And I feel like we had a quick moment. I was talking about click tracks, and you said to me, what good records were ever made on a click track? Like Bonham never used a click track. This is, I don't know, this is like 10 years ago or something. Because for years, I just remember Todd, my friend who was running Warner's, kept just saying, the Black Keys. He was like talking to me about the band for so many years. So we had that quick exchange. I'm assuming you've definitely used a click track at some point in the last couple of years for some of the records, right?
I mean, the first time I ever used a click track, which for people who don't know is like just a metronome in the studio to help you keep reference time. The first time I used that was with Danger Mouse in 2007 when we made Attack and Release. It was just for one song, just for Strange Times, and just for part of it. We made a loop. But yeah, no, we do avoid that. But what we do is if we're writing, the way we make music is basically jamming in the studio, and so like right when we kind of get an idea, we will maybe kind of rough out like an arrangement and then throw it down. And like usually what you're hearing on the album is essentially like, I don't know, it could be the first, second, or third take. And sometimes like if we start changing the arrangement, we'll take a loop. We'll take like a 4-bar loop or maybe shorter, maybe longer. And then we'll build around that. And sometimes we just stick to that, occasionally. But yeah, the way that Dan and I build tracks is like us playing together, that's like, so he'll play guitar or bass and I'll play the drums. And that's how we'll find like the groove, You know?
But it is true that if you listen to those old Bonham, the Zeppelin records, the push and pull is what made it so incredible. And there was definitely times he was speeding up, but like it was always super solid, but it made it flow. And then music became very homogenized in a sense, right?
Well, I think like it's complicated for me. I never really sought to be a drummer.
You started as a guitar player.
Yeah, started as a guitar player, and I just wanted to be in a band. See, that was like my priority. Like what I did wasn't necessarily important. I knew I couldn't sing. I mean, I couldn't really play drums either, but it was like I would be willing to do whatever. I wanted to make songs, So that I got a 4-track recorder, cassette 4-track recorder, which is a device, you can record 4 different things 4 different times and layer it, And I got one of those when I was very young, like 12 years old.
I think there was like called Tascam, or
it was a Tascam, a little cheap $100 thing. But I just would mess around with that, and then that's like when Dan and I started getting together. I had this thing, and he knew it, so he would come down and we would just start fucking around with it and making up little ideas. And that's when I met Dan. I met him when I was 8 or 9, but when we started playing music together when I was in my late teens, that's when I started playing the drums because he was so good at guitar. I just had nothing else to do. Like I couldn't contribute anything else other than that. So back in the day, even now, I mean, when I'm playing drums, I am kind of referencing just like Wu-Tang Clan sample, like stack samples, just these break beats that like, I don't know how gridded those were, but they feel really funky, but they always resolve back on the beat, on the one. And that's kind of how I try to play.
I always heard a lot of Mitch Mitchell in your drumming. Was he an influence of yours growing up?
Yeah, I mean, I love all that stuff. I'm not, I'm just like, I'm not trained at drums. I've never taken a lesson, just listening. So there's a lot of stuff these great drummers can do that like I've never even attempted. Like, I'm just like, it's not really, because I'm like, that would be cool, but like, it's kind of good for me to have like a limited palette.
What's crazy is you see these guys now on Instagram. I forget this guy's name. It's like El Estafio or something. I can't even watch it because it's so good that I'm like, I will never play again because I would never be that good ever. But it is pretty impressive what you can do. I guess we never had the access to seeing that growing up. So, you didn't, if there was a guy that good, you just didn't know unless he was in a band that you were into. But
I'm rarely impressed like musically by someone that's just good at their thing. I'm much more impressed by someone that makes something like compelling, cool.
Yeah.
Like that's always been above and beyond being good at it. Because it's like, it's not like sports, like that's why I always say like, it must suck to be like LeBron James's son. It's like, because he like plays basketball, and but like, there's a level of what's the best.
Yeah.
And if you're aspiring to do something, there's art, it's art. I mean,
I think he's pretty good, but he's never going to be LeBron.
He's never going to be. No. But, it's like, so it's like good to like recognize. For me, it was like, oh yeah, like listen to John Bonham when you're 12. It's like, oh, that's not in the cards. So what is? It's like, oh, make something cool.
Yeah. Well, take me back to the beginning. You actually grew up in Akron, and interesting enough, there are some bands from there. Devo, one that I loved growing up.
Yeah, Devo.
Amazing band.
Chrissy Hines from there. Devo was a huge influence on me. Massive influence when I was like 15. My dad got me this, it was a CD called Devo Live, The Mongoloid Years.
Sure.
It's all these recordings of them before their first album came out, and all live recordings. And there's a little story, like the first thing is a set at Max's Kansas City from I think the fall of 76 maybe. And it's most of what is on the first album, but and it sounds incredible. But like in the liner notes, you read it, it's just like they tell the story, like being from Akron and living in this apartment and driving to New York. And then they go to play Max's Kansas City for the first time. And then like David Bowie's there and like Andy Warhol's there. And then they drive back and to their apartment in their shitty van. And then like Warner Brothers is calling them, Virgin's calling them. And I was just like, it was very inspiring to me to read that when I was 15. I was like, these guys from this town I'm from, got seen and had all this stuff happen by doing it out of Akron.
And 9 Inch Nails from Ohio. Obviously, there's other bands that are from there too.
Trent Reznor's from Cleveland.
Yeah. And weirdly enough, you like grew up around the block from Dan, which is so odd that this is your first band that both of you have ever been in, I think.
I was in a band with some friends. I've been in a few bands with some friends, but this was the first real band. Yeah.
First real band, yeah.
And Dan had a bar band, you know, where he would go do covers at like the college, like dive bars around Kent. That's kind of how we formed, because if we formed officially, like when we were like 21, we were both living in Akron, and he was doing that, playing in the bar bands, and I was like working in some restaurant and mowing lawns, and just living at this punk rock house, just depressed, probably broke, really broke. And one day I was just so bummed that like I didn't know what to do with my life, and I just drove to Cleveland to like the Sam Ash store, the music store there.
Sure.
The only place that would like give some dumbass a credit. And I like signed up for like $1,000 credit. And I had these 4 tracks, but I bought this like digital 12 track. And I was like, I can record bands with this. Maybe I should try to do that. So I learned to use this little thing. And I ran into Dan a couple weeks later at this record store, the one record store in Akron. And I was like, I got this thing. That's what I've been up to. And he's like, oh shit, like, why don't you record my band, the Barn Burners? And I was like, sure, that'd be awesome. Like, I'll give you a couple $100. And I was like,
amazing,
absolutely.
yeah.
So like,
and you had all the equipment at your house.
I had some shitty Radio Shack mics and stuff, and I was living in this house where I could be loud. And he's like, I'll bring the band over and we'll do it like this day. And like I met him at my house, and we waited for the other 2 dudes who were older than Dan. Like they were like in their 30s, and like they didn't show up. They could give a fuck. And so I was sitting there, and then Dan's like, why don't you do like what you used to do, like just play drums to these songs, which I hadn't played drums in like a couple of years. Yeah. So I just set up the stuff, and I recorded us for a couple of hours. And then literally like a couple of days later, 9/11 happened. And I remember I think it was like just sitting there that day, just like mixing these songs, like spending all this time making them sound kind of cool, and just being like, what the fuck is going on? And I gave him a CD of it. Like I found it the other day. It was dated September 13th, 2001. And I gave it to him, and he called me, left a message on my machine, like, give me a call. Back then, it was really hard to get in touch with people.
Page me.
So I was like, I called him, and eventually we got in touch, and he's like, we should start a band. We should send this out and like do it for real. That's what I want to do.
Did you know there was like magic happening when you first started, even though it was a jam? And I know you had jam with them early on as teenagers too, but when you started recording those songs that became that session, did you kind of know there was something there? Or did you just, until you started mixing it, you didn't really know?
No, I always had fun playing with him, and it always was a thing. And because I think, I learned to play drums specifically to his playing, it always has had this it's always had the same feel. So yeah, I was all about it. And I was instantly like, I got the name. We're going to call ourselves the Black Keys. And it was like an inside joke because there was this schizophrenic artist in Akron named Alfred McMore. And like, my dad had written an article about him. My dad was a journalist for the local paper. My dad wrote an article about him. And my dad heard about him through Dan's father. And the guy's whole deal was that he would do these crazy 5 foot tall, 50 foot long scrolls of just the most insane crayon drawings. And they were all like cross-dressing police officers that like morphed into like a gas pump. I mean, it was out there, and it was really interesting. And but he would call our fathers, and he would leave the same message like 5-10 times a day. And he'd just be like, I need Diet Coke. I need pipe tobacco. He'd have all his list of needs and whatever he needed.
Psychotic messages.
Yeah, because he lived in a halfway house. He had no money, and like our dads would drop him off stuff. And but he'd always end it with like, if you don't do this, you're a D flat. You're a black key. Don't be a black key.
You're like, there's the band name.
Yeah. He was just, maybe it was like he was just grilling it into me. So I knew to name the band the Black Keys.
Amazing. But also there were probably, I would imagine there wasn't a lot of people that were into the same music, R.L. Burnside and obviously Captain Beefheart. There's a bunch of artists that you guys probably listened to that maybe no one else was listening to at that time in Akron, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a relatively small town, especially a small scene. There may be like 200 people kind of that we knew involved, and music, if that, and that includes like Kent and part of Cleveland. But Dan and I came from like different sides of our Venn diagrams. Like here we kind of had this one little sliver, and then we've grown to now it's pretty uniform in a way. But at the time when we first met, all of my friends were into Sonic Youth and Pavement, and then starting to get into like whatever, like Tortoise and Juno 44, whatever. And I started gravitating more towards, I was always into the Pavement, Nirvana, Sonic Youth, but I started gravitating more towards like Captain Beefheart. But I was really into this band, John Spencer Blues Explosion from New York City. And I was obsessed with their album Orange. And I went to go see them as a teenager. And they put out this record that was them backing up R.L. Burnside, who I'd never had heard of. So that's how I discovered R.L. Burnside. And Dan was listening to all this kind of electric blues, 50s electric blues, like Hound Dog Taylor and all kinds of stuff. That's 70s, but all kinds of stuff. And when we first kind of got together, he had mentioned R.L. Burnside, and I was like, oh yeah, like I have R.L. Burnside 45. And then from there, like we started seeing, like that's how our band the sound kind of evolved, because we started there, and we kind of brought in all of the other influences we had, I guess.
Great drummer, by the way. I think
Russell Simmons?
Russell Simmons, yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Incredible. I mean, I remember the first time I saw them, and we got to play with them once, but the first time I saw the Blues Explosion, it was amazing. They were so good. Russell Simmons is just like such a beast on the drums. And
not to be confused with the other Russell Simmons.
Not to be confused with the other Russell Simmons. But dude, I remember I had this tape of, like I had that 4-track. I had a tape of some band that I have with my friends. And I remember I put it up by like John Spencer's pedal board. And I just remember he looked at it, and like I just saw this giant white loafer just boom, smash it and kick it off the stage. And I was like, fucking incredible.
And were you a big Nirvana fan? You mentioned them, but did you really? They really resonated with you.
Of course. I mean, like that was when I got into music. It was like I was 11 in 1991, and my dad. I'd always kind of been into it, but really, like what happened was I bought Vanilla Ice's first record on cassette in 1989 or 1990, and I put it in my dad's car, and he just basically was like grabbing his head, just like, no. This is horrible. He's like, took it out. He's like, we can't be listening to this. Like, and then he took it upon himself to then start feeding me music. I like starting with like Jimi Hendrix smash hits, Led Zeppelin 2. And I got way into that stuff. And then as it was kind of hitting me, that's right when my older brother came home with a cassette of Nevermind, like probably early December 91. And then I saw them on SNL that January.
Changed everything.
Yeah.
Safe to say a lot of the artists that you love, though, they really didn't sell a lot of records. I mean, Captain Beefheart, a great artist, but didn't sell a ton of records, right?
No. I mean, I always say this, like about the first time I saw music or was around music in an arena was when we played opening for Pearl Jam at Madison Square Garden when I was 30. None of the shit I liked was that popular.
Yeah. Incredible. So tell me about, so you end up meeting Dan. Obviously, you met him when you were a teenager, you start playing together. He calls you up and he says, we need to do this. Obviously, there's some magic here. Yeah. At that point, were you guys trying to get a deal? Did you just want to start to play locally?
Well, I had a band that got like a little record deal once, this indie pop thing with some friends. It was pretty goofy, but I did get like a label to agree to put out a record. So Dan was like, how do we do it? And I was like, you just mail them a demo.
It's as simple as that.
And like, that's all. I was like, but you gotta have to like make it look cool. It can't just be anything. So my brother Michael made a little cover for us. So we burned some CDs and we had this little cover. It looked pretty cool. And Dan sent it out to 15 different labels, like all small, including Fat Possum, who never responded, but most labels didn't respond. But yeah, then we got responses from 3 labels, like Esterus in Bellingham, Washington was like, if you drive here and play a show, we'll come watch it. And it was like, okay, that's 4 days away. And we've never played a show. And we're like, that's not happening. So and this label Chicken Ranch out of Austin, they also were interested. But we ended up signing with Bomp. And I think partially because they distributed Devo's first 45 and there's just
something there.
It's kind of, you know, cool early indie label. And so the guy that was running it was like, yeah, if you send me 12 songs, we'll put it out and we'll give you 50 copies of vinyl. That was essentially like the agreement. And then we got this little like paragraph contract that we stupidly signed that basically was like, we own this and you get nothing you get 73 cents.
And there was a third member early on.
Oh, right? Yeah.
When
that day when Dan was going to come over for me to record his band, my really good friend Gabe Fulvmar was there and he was going to help me record. And Gabe played keyboard. So when we did that recording, Gabe's playing the little Casio organ. And he was part of the group. He's on the cover of the demo. But by the time like we started recording the album in my basement in February of 2002. And we finished. We did it in a month. But like after the second day, like our buddy Gabe just started making fun of us essentially, like, and like stopped coming into class. And he's like, I got to study for astronomy or something because he's still going to college and we'd already dropped out. And I was like, dude, you're never going to graduate college. What the fuck you need to go to astronomy for? But he quit / we kicked him out. We tried to replace him with a couple people, but it was like very obvious quickly that like we weren't going to be able to find someone that we knew that had the same kind of vibe that Dan and I did. And like Dan and I were both willing to put up with like a lot of bullshit. And it was like maybe the smartest thing we ever did. And also, you know, we were listening to a lot of bands that just didn't have bass players.
There weren't a ton. I mean, there was a couple, obviously the Stripes back in the day, but there weren't a ton
I never
of bands.
heard the White Stripes until after we had gotten a record deal.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that people would always reference Flat Duo Jets, who I also had never heard.
Never heard of them, yeah.
But like I said, one of my favorite bands is the Blues Explosion.
Right.
A bassless double guitar.
That is
drums.
Yeah.
And Dan was into like T Model Ford, and it was like, yeah, we can do this. We were Hound Dog Taylor. I mean, you know, eventually we got to the point years later where we were like, this gimmick is nothing we intended. We didn't set out for this. This was by necessity. So when we started making records, we were like, we didn't mean for this to be a gimmick. It was like, let's approach a record as if we were a 4-piece band. Let's just like play the bass, put it prominently in the mix, play keyboards, and we'll figure out how to do it live later. And that's right. That took us a long time to get to that point. Like that was 2007, so it took 5 years. But it was like, you know, that was when we started getting really successful.
But in those first couple of years, did you ever think, let's just add a bass player, or was just never really a thought?
Well, there was a big thing that was prohibiting that, and that was money.
Right, because you have to pay people more money, right?
Yeah, we didn't have we were like, no, like this is how it works. That's like a hard learning curve, is to like realize like, okay, we got to have a band. And then you're like, okay, you're going to play the big theater now. You've got to like, now your reward is you got to pay, you know, like $10,000 a show for lights. All these things you didn't have. And then, but yeah, you know, it's complicated. Well, you know, that's the thing that Dan and I have done is like we really have started from as small as you possibly can get. And I wouldn't say we've gotten as big as you possibly can get, but to get from that to, you know, headlining Coachella and Lollapalooza and arenas, and, you know, it's a hard learning curve.
People forget that you didn't really have big commercial success until like your 6th record, right?
It was our 6th album.
Yeah.
Yeah, our 6th album. I was living here in New York when that came out, and like while we were making it, and that was crazy because I think it really freaked me out because I could really feel how much that record was like resonating with people, because every restaurant I would go into here, like, I would hear it like daily, somewhere, and I was like, what the fuck?
It's happening.
It's happening, and that's when I was like, get me out of here.
Did you not want, in a way, I guess a lot of your favorite bands, we were talking about it, they were sort of under the radar, but you had a ton of syncs too early on. I think you went to, I don't know if it was Todd at that point, but you went to maybe Leor and you were like, by the way, we have more syncs than any other band on this label. Yeah. So I think at that point they were like, I think we need to invest into this band heavily.
Yeah, I went to Leor, and I don't think we had made as much money as any band, but we had more syncs, like more songs getting synced up. Yeah, you know, that was a whole nother process, the sync thing. Because when we first started, it was like you know, you would just get hell for like putting a song on a commercial. You Pitchfork or whoever would just like tear you to shreds. And meanwhile, they're running like a Converse ad at the fucking top of their head. What the fuck is happening here? But I watched like peers of mine, Modest Mouse and the Shins, all put songs in commercials, get shit. It didn't bother me, but like we were never getting played on. We weren't getting any radio play. We weren't getting. There's no way for people to kind of be exposed to our music. So it became kind of clear, like, let's take some of this money, and then people will also hear the song. What the fuck? And we just kept saying yes. We only said no to like a couple ads. One was a mayonnaise ad, and one was a Hummer ad.
It's tricky because you're struggling at, you're spending, like you said, 3, 4, 5, 6 years in a van, and someone comes to you and says, I'll pay you $100,000 for a mayonnaise commercial. At that point, it's like a dilemma for you, right? You obviously don't want to do the commercial, but you want the money.
Well, we did say no to 100,000 pounds aside for a mayonnaise commercial. I was living in an apartment that cost $420 a month and struggling to pay it. And we were told by a manager, like,
don't do
this has ruined your career. But I should say, for a time we were saying yes to kind of every single. We definitely don't do that anymore. But you know what? What ended up fucking us was that people started making sound-alikes of our songs, like very close sound-alikes.
To do more syncs and things like that, yeah.
Yeah, there's these things called jingle houses.
Yeah, sure.
And like, basically an advertiser will be like, okay, there's a commercial for toothpaste, and here's the script, and we're looking for something. And they would put in the metadata that they would send out to the script houses, Black Keys. And some...
Tighten Up or whatever it may be, right?
They would have direct references. And what happened, I'm not going to name the company, but...
Jingle punks.
But someone like a disgruntled employee sent us all the metadata. And we were like, yo, dude, what the fuck?
Yeah. They basically would just rip off songs.
You're selling a whole library of shit. And so for a long time, people just assumed like the song in this like, Pizza Hut commercial or Home Depot ad or what was like us. And it was just like verbatim fucking copies. We got really busy filing lawsuits for a while.
That pissed you off, I would imagine. Right?
Well, it pissed me off just because it was like, shittier versions of songs, and also it's just like that whole concept of like just sync a song from another band that needs the money. Don't cheapskate, because you're ultimately just gonna get like pinched for this.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. It happens all more than you think.
Although strangely enough, like everyone syncs now. Back in the day, I guess it was taboo, but now I don't think it is.
I think that like
I feel like I've seen like Zeppelin and maybe
was the Zeppelin sync. I know the story behind that. It's very interesting.
What is it?
Well, I can't tell the whole thing, but I will tell you. I just tell you that they were trying to get another band's song, a classic rock band song, and like the negotiation had gotten to this level, and still the answer was no. And so then the advertiser went
straight to
Zeppelin and started at that first number, but the guy already knew what the high number was.
Right.
Yeah, that's the story.
Yeah,
but yeah, I think I'd like to think that we kind of made it easier for bands to make some money off putting their songs in a commercial or whatever. And now at this point, it's like it's weird. That's the thing, because like to have to assume some other generation's ideals of what like punk ethics are. Mm-hmm. It's like this isn't my shit.
Yeah.
Like to be straight edge and to not do this. That's like only $5 a show. I was like, that's not fucking. That's some like.
We need to live.
Yeah, like that's not my shit.
That's some Black Flag shit.
I know we have to like play this game a little bit, but at some point you're just kind of like, fuck it. Like it's not really my shit. It's like I want the fucking 13-year-old kid who's in a fucking culture void to be exposed to our music. It doesn't need to be like some grandiose hip thing, gatekeeping thing.
Yeah.
Like it was like I'm confident in our music enough, and like who the guys Dan and I are, what we're doing. We think it's cool.
Yeah,
that's like you get to the point where like once you are there, you're pretty good.
Yeah,
and it's hard to get there. I definitely was not there for a long time, but you eventually get there. We're just like actually, like. You're so used to being judged or feeling judged as a musician, whether it's a review. Eventually, you're just like, right. Like, this guy's a fucking idiot, and like, I'm never going to convince him otherwise. Yeah. And he's got his voice, and I've got my voice. And
it's so indie that no one hears it. I mean, there are people like that want that. But talk to me about getting that first deal. You know, Fat Possum obviously came on your second record, and talk to me about signing the deal with them, because that was a label you loved back in the day, right?
Yeah, Fat Possum was the label that put out that John Spencer, R.L. Burnside record, and, you know, I got into RL, and Dan was into RL and Junior and T-Mona Ford, and so that was the label we wanted to sign to all along. And we got to, you know, when our first album came out, The Big Come Up, it came out in May of 2002, and you know, within 2 weeks we got like an email to our little Black Keys Hotmail account from some, you know, probably junior A&R guy at Atlantic Records, and I was like, I remember I printed it out, took it to Dan, and I was like, look at this. Like, it's an email from like a major label.
What did it say? We just want to hear more.
It said like, can you send us a CD? And we responded like, they're like $12. It's like, go to Other Music and buy it, please. Like, what the fuck, dude?
You're working at Atlantic.
And of course, no response.
Yeah.
But it's like no response. But yeah, soon after that, like, you know, people started kind of paying attention locally, and then we were on this tour. We had this guy named Ralph Carrera, who thankfully was like a mercenary booking agent. He agreed to book us a 3-week tour for like $400. And that was one of the few things that our label at the time, Alive, did. They paid for that.
And they gave you 50 vinyl records, I guess.
Yeah, and they gave us a couple CDs and stuff. But they did book this tour. And without the tour, our career would never have happened. And essentially, I found the other day, like, the actual printout from this email from 20-some years ago. It was basically like, here's your routing. It was like routed like Chicago, Denver, Vancouver, like, so like
Texas.
Just, it was like boom. It was just crazy. Like, you just we had no, our guarantees were $50. We had no we didn't have a credit card.
In a van, or what were you traveling in?
My minivan.
Yeah.
But
were those glamorous days for you, or like, fuck no, those are like the worst?
I mean, it was a big, huge adventure. Yeah. It was amazing. But yeah, it was you know, it was weird. The first, you know, 4 or 5 days were like, it's just pointless. And then we played a show in Seattle, and there was like, somehow, without a publicist or anything, there was a little blurb in like the Stranger or the Seattle Weekly or whatever, and we go to play this place, and there's like, I don't know, 200 people there. Our biggest show we ever played, and we're like, fuck, we get like $500. And I was like, fuck, that's enough gas money to get us home.
Yeah,
we're kind of gold. Mm-hmm. But what happened was, we were supposed to play this club in Dallas on that tour, and we'd stop at a payphone and call the day before to like advance the show. And I called, and I was like, well, we're gonna be there tomorrow. And the guy's like, no, like, this bar has a different name now. Like, they're like, that owner's in prison. Like, so we're like, what?
Don't come.
Fuck, don't come. Yeah, they don't come.
Yeah.
So we pivoted and just got back in the car and drove to Mississippi to go. Because I forgot to mention this, in Los Angeles, 2 guys from Epitaph, who were the partner label of Fat Possum, had come out. This guy Andy Calkin and this guy Mark Bauer. They came out to see us play, and they're like, you know, we're checking you out for Fat Possum. They're interested, and we're like, so we knew we were on their radar.
Yeah.
So we just like drove to them and showed up
at their house, or
to Oxford, and we called them. We're like, we're here, and they're like, okay, shit, all right. We're gonna set you up a show to play tonight. And we went and played this little bar, and some frat dudes were there. They all left while we were playing, and we're like, fuck, like, damn, like. And then Matthew and Bruce, the owners, were like, that was the test. If everyone leaves, we'll sign you.
Imagine if you did that now. If you just drove up to a label and like waited outside for them to come out. Like, people just don't do that anymore. But back in the day, I guess you had to do that. Right?
I mean, there's more efficient ways to do it now. But back then, it's like, it did work. We ended up, you know. But what happened was, right when that happened, we get home from that tour, and then we got a call that Seymour Stein wanted to come see us. So he flew to Cleveland, and we hung out with him and this guy Steve Popovich, who owned Cleveland International Records, that put out like Meatloaf's records and stuff, and they were interested in doing stuff. And essentially, this was October 2002. essentially we were told we were going to get a contract from Sire, from Warner, and
Seymour Stein's a legend in the business.
I mean,
one of the biggest ever.
Yeah, and he was calling my house. We were like having phone calls with him on a weekly basis.
Amazing.
And he's like, contract's coming, and then I basically, just being a young idiot, was like, we're going to give you 2 more weeks to get us a contract. But my thought was like, if they can't get us a basic contract in 2 weeks, like,
we'll never make a record.
We'll never make a record. Right. So yeah, that day came and went, and then we acted on our word, and we just signed the Fat Possum contract and sent that along with we made a CD like the next day in my basement. We recorded a record.
Amazing.
I mixed it and sent the CD, and we were, like I always say, we like basically agreed to stay in the minors for like at least another couple of years.
Yeah, and eventually you meet Beck, and he's pretty supportive and walked me up to that point, and actually touring with Radiohead early on too, right?
Yeah, I met Beck when I was 16 because my Uncle Ralph, who played with Tom Waits for a long time, was buddies with this guy, Smokey Hormel, who was Beck's touring guitar player. So when Odelay came out, I was 16. I was obsessed with that record. And I was talking to my Uncle Ralph, who lived in San Francisco, and I told him I was going to go see Beck. And he's like, I can get you backstage passes. And I was like, what? Okay. So I went backstage and I met Beck. He was super, super cool. And funny, and of course my friends thought like I was the coolest kid because I'm getting like backstage passes to Beck. And then I actually came back and played Akron the next year, and I saw him then too. But the real thing with Beck was like we were here in New York opening for Sleater Kinney at the Roseland Ballroom. It was us, Blonde Redhead, Sleater Kinney, and like after the show, the ladies from Sleater Kinney were like, "Come with us. We're going to the SNL after party." Beck just played. We're friends with Beck. We're like, okay, shit. So this is February of 2003. It was a big, huge snowstorm. And I just happened to have a promo of that first Fat Possum record in my pocket. It hadn't come out yet.
Just carrying it with you.
Yeah. And I gave it to Beck. And I reminded him that I was like Ralph Carney's nephew. And we're probably drunk because we were drinking. Yeah. I was like drinking all the half-empty drinks at the SNL after party because I couldn't afford shit. And a couple weeks later, we get hit up by our booking agent. He's like, Beck's offered you the summer tour.
Amazing.
And so we're like, fuck yeah. So yeah, we went on tour with Beck, summer 2003, and he was so supportive. And later that summer, we went to Brixton. We went to London to do like some early touring over there, and he let us open for him at Brixton Academy. And he's been a buddy,
I like him a lot. Whenever I see him, we're chatting, and then he leaves in the middle of a conversation. Yeah. I don't know if that's like normal. Is that just me, or he does that with everyone?
He's eccentric. He's eccentric.
We'll be in the middle of like a sentence, and then he just like leave. I'm like, maybe I said something weird, but
he's eccentric.
Yeah. Do you remember those tours? Are you when you're reminiscing about those tours with Beck and things like that, all the way up until SNL, which was really the big, I guess maybe one of your big breaks, right?
We had a lot of these kind of real run-ins, like we did tour with Radiohead. They invited us out to play maybe 8 shows with them when they were doing what became I think In Rainbows.
Great album.
But it was like they were doing underplays. We played with them, and that was really cool. And but we got to meet Tom York briefly. Johnny Greenwood was very friendly. They all were very friendly. But we got to meet a lot of those kind of guys. Radiohead was early. Tom would mention us like as a reference of a band he liked back in the day. And we were always like, it's so wild. Like,
it's crazy.
It's so crazy. We should like send them some flowers or something.
I think around that time, myself and one of my best friends, Nirvana, we put on a show with you at the Rosebar. I don't know if you remember that. Back in the day, we had.
I remember I can tell you the date.
Yeah.
I think it was September 12th, 2009. I mean, I'm like pretty on the money.
Because we used to do shows together, me and her. We had like you played Guns N' Roses.
It was Fashion Week.
Yeah, and we used to do these things, and I remember you played, and I feel like that's when things really started happening. So I don't know if that was around the time of Brothers, but Brothers was really the record that kind of broke through for you.
We had just finished making most of everything in Brothers except for one song when we did that. And we had just finished making a record called Black Rock, which came out a couple weeks later, this hip-hop record, which we made here in New York. Where we made all the music, and then we had Dame Dash kind of call on rappers to come in, and so that's probably why we were here.
Yeah.
Also, to like work, because we tried to do like more, and we decided like we were good.
It was pretty amazing, by the way. I mean, just playing that room, those are some of the best days, I think, in New York ever in my entire life.
That fall of 2009 was peak NYC for to a certain degree. I mean, I also think, when the Lakeside Lounge was open, early 2000s was pretty good.
Yeah. Well, tell me about, again, like we spoke about it, but again, 6 years till you really broke through, and I guess kind of like 8 years of active touring for you. So the idea of like perseverance in the business for you, like if you really didn't persevere, do you think we'd be here today? I mean, you really had to work at it, and I think a lot of bands think that maybe people have overnight successes, but for you guys, you worked so hard at it, and still to this day, right? But the idea of perseverance and what you're doing, like talk to me about like the fact that you had to be so scrappy for so many years to get where you are.
Well, I mean, honestly, to put it in perspective, the perspective I have now, I think when you first start and like that whole time leading up to our breakthrough, like there are these little incremental steps that you can take, whether it's just switching from the Mercury Lounge to Bowery Ballroom to Irving Plaza. Like every time you can do these things where like you can see progress,
baby steps.
You can see it, like, and like there doesn't need to be like MSG doesn't need to be like the target. It just be like, and that's what we used to be like. Let's just try to get to the next venue. I think that like the hardest part, honestly, is when you've achieved success, is to not be complacent.
Yeah,
and I think a lot there's these trajectories to every band. There's two options and every band takes both at some point. Like we took both. It's like you try to double down on your success. That's what like El Camino was. And then it's like try to make your more like artistic, deeper record, which is fine. Both are fine. But the problem is when you get to a point where you feel like you've got like there's nowhere else to go but down, or like that it's all, you can take it all for granted. Like I feel like we've kind of been through all these steps, and I feel like we've arrived at this place now, like 22 years into our career, where I think when we put out our last single, like Wild Child on our last album, Dropout Boogie, like it came out and it went like straight to the #1 alternative airplay within a couple weeks, and then stayed there for a minute, and then went away, and it was like, that's our album cycle.
Yeah.
I was like, this is so boring.
Yeah.
Like all these other songs no one's going to hear because they're not singles and because they're not on TikTok, and
it's so quick.
I was like, I don't want that to happen again. So we were like we just decided to like try to make our best album that we've ever made. That was kind of what we set out to do on this new album, Ohio Players. And so we enlisted the help of
Beck.
Yeah. And then we wrote a lot of songs with Beck. And then we went, and Dan was like, we should work with Noel Gallagher.
Which is like my dream, by the way. So.
And we'd met Noel like briefly a couple times. I met him here in New York once and at Glastonbury backstage briefly. And we had like reached out to Noel's people, and we were basically told like, Noel doesn't really do that.
Yeah.
He's a fan, but he's not. And then my neighbor down the street, this guy, John Dittmar, who's retired now, but he started a agency called Pinnacle. He was a booking agent.
Sure.
He did like a bunch of big acts, including Oasis. I was talking to him while we were golfing once, because we would go play this little muni course all the time by my house. And I was like, we're trying to work with Noel, but like, he's like, let me send him a note. And I don't know if it was that or not, but we heard back pretty quickly, like, if you come meet Noel in London in January, he's got these 4 days where he's available.
Isn't it amazing when you get straight to the source? Like all that red tape is like bullshit, right?
I know, but like, like to put it in context, so like for really like, so what we had to do was, go to London, and we purposely picked out Toe Rag, was where the White Stripes made Elephant, and the reason being is because we knew it was like a very straightforward studio. There was no Pro Tools, there's no editing capabilities. It was basically
like an old Neve board or something? Or?
There's an old bespoke insane board, but with no bussing, just real simple. But the idea was like, this is going to force us to sit down and write a song and get a take. Because what we wanted was like a take from a song that we just wrote with Noel. So
Amazing.
so like the like it didn't hit me till after we completed this mission, which is what it was. It was like special forces style. Like, let's go. And the idea also, there's also some other things that were mandatory, which was that we have to have fun.
Right.
Everything that we're doing has to be fun. So we went and stayed at like the Chiltern Firehouse,
Amazing.
and we like partied every single night. And
So you didn't go into that session with an idea, or did you? Did you?
No
have
ideas.
No ideas.
no one had anything.
Yeah.
And so we went in the first day, and we wrote the song called You'll Pay, which is on the record. And then the next day we invited our friend Leon Michaels from L. Michaels Affair to join us, and we wrote On the Game. We got the take you hear on the album. Is what we recorded. The only thing that's not like that wasn't written that day. I mean, we did overdubs in Nashville, but the lyrics were not done, but the melodies were there. So what you're hearing, like when you hear the guitar, the bass, and the drums, it's the actual song that we wrote that day. And then the third day we got another song called Only Love Matters. And so we got 3 songs in 3 days. And on the 4th day we went to the studio, and we were like, let's not push our luck here.
Yeah.
We got 3 songs. And Noel's like, yeah. And then at the end of that, Noel's like, I've never done this before. I've never just written a song with other people in the room. And so that's why we kept getting told, like, when the film was like, yeah, Noel doesn't really do that.
Yeah.
It's like, but then like, I think, he got very confident after that. Cause like I saw an interview like a couple weeks after that, and he was like, talking about how he wants to write some songs for Adele. And I was like, you should, you totally should, but bring us in the room too.
Yeah, I've heard that him and Liam are actually friends secretly, and they're getting back together. There's so many rumors about this, but I'd love to see them back together at some point.
We hung with Liam this summer.
How was that?
We opened for him at a big fest in Milan. I mean, it was amazing.
Yeah,
they're both so funny, and they only said positive things about each other.
yeah, right. So because I always hear that they're friends and they go in through the back door of each other's houses.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. I hope that's possible.
Yeah, and
There's a third Gallagher brother, Paul.
Is there? Oh yeah, right. I saw in the documentary.
And we hung out with Paul too.
Oh, that's cool. And tell me the story behind "Beautiful People Stay High," the song you did with Beck. I mean, I always get like amazing Sly Stone vibes from the song. Amazing track. Tell me about how that came about together.
Yeah, well, the MO for this album, like I said, was like to try to really enjoy the process and to put a lot of effort into it. So we'd been working in Nashville a lot, like the last 12 years or 10 years, and it was important to me that we get out of Nashville.
Because you live there, right?
We both live there,
Yeah.
and we both have a studio there, but we work at Dan's studio. But I just thought it was important for us to go experience stuff together. And so the first place we went was LA, and we went and worked at this place called Valentine in the Valley. This studio that's like basically was mothballed in like 1973. Seriously. Because like the guy that started it was like this Capitol Records producer, engineer. He built this place so he could do his own productions in the mid 60s. And then as he was like a big band jazz dude. And as it turned into more rock and roll, like I guess the guy was just so fed up with the shit. Like instead of cutting like 5 songs in a session, like now you're talking about like 8 hours to do one overdub. So the guy just like, fuck this. I don't fucking blame him. Imagine now if that guy got to experience a hip hop session, he would probably just blow his brains out. Just like listening to 2 bars and like nothing for 2 days.
Yeah.
But anyway, so this guy rented it, and it's basically untouched since the time. So the vibe was right. And so we kept going to LA and working, and one day we had like Beck couldn't work, and so we reached out to Dan the Automator, a producer who I've been a fan of since Handsome Boy Modeling School, and Deltron 3030. And we've been in touch. I never met him, but we'd been in touch like over the years through Instagram. And I asked him if he wanted to come down and like, do something with us. And he came down the next day from San Francisco. And he had a bunch of loops that he had made. And a lot of the stuff, some of it was from the KPM, like this old like sound library catalog that like a lot of hip hop sampled from, but it's basically like mid 70s like instrumental pieces that like are easily licensable. But he had this couple KPM kind of loops, and we gravitated to this kind of like knockoff Jackson 5 little thing. We're like, let's just fuck around with this. And we built a song around like a 2-bar loop, and we built it out. And that's an example of us not using a click, but using a loop, you know, and playing, then structuring it and then playing along to the thing. So as long as you're resolving it like properly, it will feel, so we got this track, and we got a few other tracks. And then of course, like, it just felt dirty to not invite Beck at this point, because we've been doing everything with Beck. And Beck's like a lyrical genius and a melodic genius. He's a musical genius. But so Beck's the one who wrote the lyric for that. And
now, does he jam in the studio, Beck, or does he just?
We have before. He's I mean, he's a great musician. He's a great guitar player. But he didn't do much of that. He played a little bit of organ and keyboards on some stuff, but most of it was melody and lyrics, you know.
A couple of the guys in his band were in one of my favorite bands of all time, Jellyfish. Roger Manning,
and Jason Faulkner.
And I think that band is like beyond incredible.
Yeah, underrated band.
Underrated for sure. So you do this record. It's coming out actually in April.
Yeah.
And the third single just came out. I think just the other, or it's coming out. It's coming out any day now.
It's coming out tonight.
Coming out tonight. Amazing. And you're playing tonight, which is awesome. So tonight's like a Barbados, some kind of charity thing that you're playing at?
Yeah. It's a charity that provides meals that get delivered to people with chronic illnesses who have very specific dietary needs. Anthony Mason and John asked us to do it. And of course, Anthony, they've both been big supporters over the years, and this was the first time it made sense for us to do it. I think, like, you know,
it's a pretty great lineup too. It's Dave Grohl. It's a lot of great artists, I think.
I know. I'm kind of confused how we're on it, but it's fine.
I think you mentioned it's been, 22 years you've been together. Has your dynamic with Dan changed a lot over the years?
You know, yeah, it's been all over the place. Like when we first started dating, like when we first started hanging out, it's like we were like dating. Like we didn't really know each other that well, you know.
Although you grew up around the corner from each other.
Sure, but we were a year apart. But like, and that's a big difference when you're in high school. And he was like kind of more aligned with like soccer dudes, and I was more aligned with like dipshits. But when we first started like hanging out back in the day, it was like, you know, we were really starting to get to know each other, and we were set on a goal, but it was like, you know, and then you go through all these different periods of being in a band. And it's like, as you get successful, it could be like, you know, there can be the ego, all these things can come into play. But we're in this spot now where it's just like, we've like just been through like the meat grinder so much that it's like, we truly are like
brothers in a way.
Well, yeah, absolutely. But also like, we are like very best friends. I mean, we talk on the phone like 4 times a day.
Amazing.
Any bump in the road gets resolved very easily, when it used to be like it could be more of a headache. But we have been seeing eye to eye on like everything. But I think one of the most important things is like musically we never bump heads musically. And so like that's never been the issue. And now like I think we've just learned to, I think us making a priority of like actually going out and like hanging out on the road, partying together, going shopping together, just making fun of each other. It's come full circle for now. It's just like when you get into these press schedules or some sort of tight thing that would normally like add a lot of pressure, it feels comfortable to be doing it with him, because we just, at the end of the day, it's like, you know, it doesn't feel so tense, you know.
Did you ever think there was a time where you might break up? Because he did a solo record for a while. You took a 4 or 5 year.
Well, I think for hiatus. Sure. I think for sure. I mean, when he first announced his first solo record, it was very stressful for me, but it was ultimately very good, because I had this kind of glimmer of like, wow, like this whole thing I've been working on through my 20s, like it could just go out the window. And I was like, I think maybe I'm not working on it hard enough. Maybe we can do this even better. And it happened like right. His solo record came out like February 2009, and we took a few months off, and it was like right after that, like we got booked to do a festival here called All Points West, or All Points East.
Yeah, I remember that festival.
And anyway, like. So I knew we were going to do at least one show. I knew we had this thing coming up. So, and then we got this opportunity from Dame Dash to make this hip hop record. And like, so when all these opportunities started kind of coming in, I just went full in on them. Like, let's do it. We got to do it.
Yeah.
We got to do it. And then I started realizing like this how important the band is to me, and how we needed to step it all up. So if he hadn't done that, I might not have realized that. And so it's like the product of that solo record, I think, actually is Brothers,
which was one of your biggest records ever.
Yeah,
yeah. And you went on to produce a bunch of artists on your own too during that time period, right?
I've produced a handful.
Michelle too. You did a couple of her records.
I did a couple of her records. I've done some other stuff, but I mean that's what got me into wanting to make music, was like the idea of producing and being in a band. And now I focus all my energy on the Black Keys. Like, I help Dan with some projects if he asks me to come in, like co-produce something occasionally. I work with this band, Bass Drum of Death. I did a record for them like a couple of years ago, but I really don't do much production anymore. I just focus on being in the band. I love doing it. I like doing it, but I had this thing where I was like, just realizing like, what is it that I really want to do? And it's like, I just want to be in a band.
Yeah, yeah.
That's all and now like I got 2 little kids, and it's like my days are pretty full.
Yeah.
So like I don't need any more headaches or
Right.
like what's the best thing what's the best that could happen if I produce a record? Like,
what's so hard now?
I don't know. Yeah. I'm just like, but it's not about the best. It's like for me, it's like what's probably going to happen is I'm going to get emotionally attached to this project, and it's going to fail.
Yeah.
And I'm going to feel like a fucking asshole. So why don't I just like not do
my
that?
Where you even on your off nights, you're with Dan because you're DJing. I know you guys did you just did one in LA at the Chateau.
Yep.
And you like doing that, right? Because it's like you can geek out about 45s and just play whatever the fuck you guys want, right?
We've been having fun every time we get together. Yeah. We've been doing these hit record hangs. We're doing one actually here on Friday, but it's hard to find like the right room.
Yeah.
know? It's like,
where's the one on Friday?
It's at Treasure Club.
Okay.
Johnny T's new place.
Amazing.
But I mean, like, I think ultimately what we're trying to do is like throw a party.
Yeah.
It's like, I wish we could just like rent a warehouse. That seems to be the ideal. You know what I mean? It's like, but then like, it's just like, you can see it just like devolving. Then what? Okay, rent the warehouse. Now we should just start playing house music too. And then soon, Dan and I are just going to be ravers. Like our next record, we're just going to
a rave record,
bucket hats.
What would you say your relationship is with the music industry at this point? I mean, do you feel like you would ever sell your publishing? Everyone and their mother is selling their publishing these days. Do you feel like you have a good relationship with the business side of music at this point, or because you always kind of did your own thing too, in a way? I mean, you obviously signed to Warner's, but in a way, you've always kind of carved your own path in this business.
Yeah, I mean, it's ever evolving, the industry. My uncle was in a band signed to Warner, and they made a record and got dropped immediately. But I grew up listening to this record and seeing that logo,
yeah,
and of course Devo. And so I mean, I always wanted to sign to Warner, and
now you're on it.
We've been on Warner for almost 20 years, and at this point, like, I still think you need you don't need it, but it's helpful to have a big label helping,
And to have the machine behind you, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, but then again, you can be a kid and just put something on TikTok and sell out an arena tour. So like,
that's true.
I'm just a little old school when it comes to that. As far as like the publishing stuff goes, I've never considered selling our publishing. We've never had a publishing deal.
Really? Interesting.
We've only had admin deals.
Is that because you never wanted one? I mean, obviously you could have had one.
We had like a little bit more. We had a publishing deal that was an admin deal with an advance that took a little higher ratio. It was with Chrysalis, and it was not good for us. And I ended it after a year. That was a long time ago. And I think it was mostly because we were cash poor. We took some money, but it was not much, and I would never do that again. But I know some people that take publishing deals that are fucking amazing.
Yeah, you hear all these artists now selling their catalogs like 500 million or something.
I know some guys that don't sell it. They just do like 2-year increments, and they get fuck you money. And I mean, yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of always been old school where it's like, bet on yourself. That said, if someone like comes around and offered me $500 million,
You'll take
or a lot less than that.
You'll take it. I wanted to ask you, and this could be living or dead, but who do you think the best drummer of all time is?
Oh, man. I think that the answer is John Bonham.
I agree with you wholeheartedly.
I know you do your top fives.
Yeah.
So we're gonna do a top five drummers.
Well, we should do that. I mean, ultimately, I just wanted to know because I always feel like
I can give you my top five drummers.
Yeah, I mean, there's like so many people can play a Bonham groove, but they can't play a Bonham groove.
You know who can do a Bonham groove really good? Is Matt Sorum.
Oh yeah, who's a very close friend of mine.
Yeah, and he's one of those few guys that you can hear.
Do it, yeah.
And it gives you kind of like chills up your neck. Where you're like, okay, fuck.
So let's talk about the top five drummers then, Patrick Carney.
My top five drummers.
Was this be number five? Started with number five.
Started number five. Russell Simmons from the Blues Explosion. Number three,
number four. We forgot number four.
Number four, Jeremiah Green.
From Modest Mouse. I think we lost him, right?
Yeah, he died about a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, he might even be higher, really. He could be three. But
number three.
What do you think? Well, I know who number one and number two is. One's John Bonham. Number two is Bill Ward.
Bill Ward, great choice.
Yeah.
Underrated in a sense. I mean, not if you know drummers, not, but like a lot of people don't talk about Bill Ward anymore, but he was an incredible drummer.
Outrageous drummer.
Yeah. And number three.
Man, this is tough because there's just so many people I want to name. But I'm going to say Alan Myers from Devo.
Okay. Innovative too. Electronic drums before they were like a thing, and
super tight.
Yeah.
Opposite of how I could ever play or want to play.
Yeah. It's a great top five. And a couple other top fives I just want to get to. Your top five music documentaries of all time. Are you a big music documentary?
I mean, I'm not probably the guy to ask about this because for a long time I didn't watch music documentaries.
Really? Oh, I thought you did. For some reason I thought that you...
I have been.
Okay.
I have been since COVID.
Yeah.
Since COVID, I have been. But for a long time, I don't know what it was. It was like too triggering or something.
Well, there was like Metallica, right, which was a triggering movie for anyone in a band, I guess, because
it's one of my favorite movies. Some Kind of Monster.
Some Kind of Monster. But the dynamic is like it's so real that it's like if you're in a band, it's like, man, this is really what it is.
Oh, it's psycho, but it's like I can watch that movie. I could watch it once every 3 months, and.
And maybe you do. I don't know.
I have at one point. I mean, I laugh at it a lot, but I'm also like sometimes I'm like. It'll hit me, and I was like, "Yeah, fuck, it's too real." I mean, but nothing compares to Spinal Tap, which is
very real too. If you're in a band,
the other day we were at SIR in Hollywood. We were rehearsing
on Santa Monica.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I walk in and I hear this song that's so familiar. I can't quite pin it for a second. I'm like, what the fuck? And I'm like, holy shit, it's Stonehenge by fucking Spinal Tap blaring and I was like, fuck. I was like, who the fuck's in there? Because they have like the list of the bands in there. It says Studio One, Hello Cleveland. I was like, holy shit, Spinal Tap is in there.
Right, because the new movie's coming out.
Under an alias.
Right.
So I was like, I walk into our room, I was like, and everyone's like, yes, it is.
Amazing.
And then like I saw Christopher Guest, Harry Shears come out.
Do they really play? I'm like
I didn't get to see.
Yeah, I don't know.
But one of their texts came out, and I was like, "Is it really them?" He's like, "Yeah." I was like, "Fuck." I was like, "They're probably my favorite band."
That's amazing. Well, we can get into another top five.
Yeah.
And one I think that you'd have no trouble answering. Top five bands that should have been bigger than they were.
Oh wow.
Starting with number five, because you love all kinds of. You're a music geek like me, so this should be an easy one for you.
Top five bands that should have been bigger than they are. I mean. Fuck.
Now this could be anything. It could be blues, could be rock, it could be any kind of music.
Yeah. I mean, I think man, there's that's really hard because there's just so much. Like that's our whole record hangs are essentially playing music by people who made these songs that should have been bigger than they are.
Like I talk about Jellyfish constantly. Right. And people are like, who the fuck is Jellyfish? Stop talking about them already.
To talk about bands, though, I mean, I think Pavement's a good band to start off with five.
Yep.
They were hugely influential to me. I saw them when I was a teenager, and just their musical universe around that, from the Jigs to Preston School of Industry to Silver Jews. I mean, it's pretty highly influential
and underrated.
Oh, very, very underrated. And I think there's a lot of classic rock stuff that like kind of falls into that. But I think Galaxy 500 is really underrated.
That's being number 4 for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's some bands we mentioned earlier on in the podcast that we could discuss, but
Well, I mean, I think number 1 for me would be Captain Beefheart.
Right. I was gonna.
But it's a lot of it's kind of inaccessible. But I think like Safe as Milk, to me,
great record.
I mean, I think it should be up there with the Doors' first record.
Yeah. That's sort of your Bible in a way, right? I mean, you love that record.
I love that record.
Yeah.
I love that. I have 2 of his paintings.
Amazing. We still have number 3 and number 2.
Jesus. There's just so much. Most of the music I listen to is just highly underrated. Most music is highly underrated.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's it's like you could just put any band there. But I'm trying to think of some that I don't know, man. There's just so much.
Well, it could be R.L. Burnside. It could be stuff that you like that people.
I know, but I'm just thinking about. I was just trying to think about indie rock bands.
Yeah, indie rock bands. Sure.
It's just depressing. How? Because like I said, when I was a kid, like the biggest show I saw was Dinosaur Jr. Until I was in my mid-20s, the biggest concert was my first concert, and it was right after Dinosaur Jr. had their "Feel the Pain" song, and they played to like a half-filled Agora Theater in Cleveland. But that was the biggest show I saw. When I saw Beck in Cleveland, like it was small. When I saw Modest Mouse, it was small.
Well, we could put Dinosaur Jr. on that list, like number 3 or number 2, because a little bit.
I don't know if there's. I wouldn't put him on the list. I don't listen to him that much. I think he's a great guitar player, but no, I mean, there's just so much of it. I'm drawing a blank because I get asked these questions, and I can't. I'm like, I need my cyborg.
We could do your top 3, and then we could just
we'll call that top 3.
Top 3.
Pavement, Galaxy 500, Captain Beefheart. I mean,
well, that's a great list.
That's pretty good.
And the new record, excited to hear it. Obviously, I've heard 3 songs already. It's amazing. So I'm excited for this tour. The tour is coming up. I think by the time this airs, I think the tour will be kind of kicking off.
We're gonna announce our real actual U.S. tour. It gets announced in like a week.
Okay. But I believe, it starts somewhere in like the next couple months. So
yeah, we'll be out in the U.S. Throughout the year. But we're going to Europe end of April.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, I love what I've heard, so I'm excited to hear the whole record.
Thank you, man.
And this is great.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. We'll have to do a part 2 at some point.
I know next time, like,
We'll do the hi-hat podcast.
Give me the top 5 beforehand. So
I was going to do a food one with you, but I didn't know if you were like a big foodie, so I'm not sure. Like that,
I can get best fast food,
like best burger, best pizza place. That's always like people.
Dan's more the foodie.
He is, right?
That's why I'm so good at being in a band. I'm just like, when it comes to those types of decisions, I'm just like, I'll just have what Dan's having.
That's the name of the next podcast. I'll have what Dan's having.
Yeah.
Thanks, Patrick. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming on.